As background, I got to meet Jonathan as both of us were at Google. He a year earlier in 2005, he sold a company that became Google Spreadsheets and Sheets. Through that, he was able to be a co-founder of all the different Google apps now called G Suite products, from Drive to Docs to what we're using right now for the Q&A called Slides. And after a few years in that, Jonathan decided to take leadership of the Google for Education product suite. So G Suite specifically devoted to the education and school sector. Beyond that, he's also helped develop a couple of other products in the education space, like Expeditions, as well as Jamboard. I'm sure Jonathan will talk about that. But one of the reasons why I invited Jonathan to share is, one is I've heard him speak before many times, invited him to speak in New York quite a few times, but also he's a parent of 3. And he also served on the school board in New Jersey of his kid's school. So clearly, as you can tell, he's very passionate about the education space, knows technology like no other, and is happy to share what kind of resources could be helpful to parents and people who are interested in bringing technology to more kids. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
I think that was a great intro. Thanks, Chris. I definitely have been involved in education for quite a while now, about 6 years. And about 6 months ago, I joined a company that took me out of the education space, but get involved again in my personal life and some of the things I do outside of work. And our product is used at Zapier, where I joined in both education and in business. So it's still somewhat relevant, but I'm not in the ed tech space anymore. So it's a little bit of a change. So, but as Chris said, I think really the journey that I had at Google, it was about 14 years or so, started with collaborative tools, which were used so much by schools, by educators and by students and administrators, that we eventually, I'll say, gave in, and we had to develop educational products more directly. So when we started Google Classroom, we literally just tried to aim it at the most important problems teachers were facing. And that problem really was time. They needed more time. They were spending way too much time in administrative tasks and not enough time with our kids. And that's what Classroom tried to handle, was to save time. And when we looked closer and said, where are they spending the most time, it was in that assignment workflow, just paper back and forth. And while by that time, it was 2013, we should have been well into schools going all digital, we were nowhere near it. And so Classroom, I would say, leveraged the activity we already had in Google Drive and Docs and other tools, and made the assignment workflow process easier. And it became incredibly successful just on that basis, and then was able to grow into other things. And for sure, with this crisis we're all facing, schools have just, I would say, amped up their usage of tools like Classroom and Drive and Docs and Zoom and other tools that are not Google, to probably 4 or 5 times the volume that it was just 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it's a huge challenge, but a huge saving for the school to be able to continue to teach. And I have a feeling that what we'll see next year is potentially finally the actual removal of things like snow days and other things that now the schools will be equipped, because they know what it's like to teach remotely. And when students are out for reasons that are a little different than actual illness, if they've got something extended that they're going to be out for, or other personal reasons that allows them to still learn, maybe they'll be able to participate in class even when they're not there. So I think there'll be some silver lining to all of this, hopefully, in the education space. But we'll see. But I know it's definitely a challenge for parents, a little different for all of us when the students are home all day. So I think that was part of what we were going to talk about today.
Well, why don't we start to talk about Classroom, first of all? For those who don't know, can you explain what is Google Classroom?
Yeah. So, Classroom is basically, it provides 3 basic things. And it is a G Suite product. So if you use G Suite, using Classroom is just as simple as using Docs or Sheets. And it provides a roster of the class. So it gives someone the ability to start a class, a teacher, start a class and understand who is in the class, either invite those people or get them to join really easily through an online code. So the roster is the first. Second is the communication stream, the ability to allow anyone in the class to communicate with each other, particularly teacher to student and back, either privately or openly in the class, and even student to student within the class, and keep resources, share resources. So communication is the second thing. And the third is the assignment workflow, the ability to assign work and receive it back, give feedback and offer it back. And it's a very immediate flow. It's one of the biggest benefits of doing it online is you can get feedback to students when it's relevant, instead of getting a paper back with red marks on it a week later when it's no longer relevant. And there's a lot of other features in there. There's parent notifications, there are grades, there's other things, but I would say those are the big three major things. One other way to understand it is to just go with your Gmail account to classroom.google.com and start a class. And it's really straightforward to do. And it's actually pretty enlightening if your students are using it, then your kids, if your kids are using it as students, then you'll understand better what the teacher's using and what the student's using. I would say you might also find a use for it in your own lives or your own work, and it's free.
What made it really successful and get the adoption up? Was it the sale of Chromebooks? Was it even before Chromebooks, or can you share more?
Yeah, it was a combination. I mean, Chromebooks, I would love to say that we had this grand plan at Google that said, okay, our strategy is going to be to develop hardware that's perfect for schools and software that's perfect for schools. And it's not really how it went, but over time we found that these two products that really are perfect for schools, one specifically made for schools and one that turned into a perfect product for schools, which was Chromebooks, just came together at the same time, and that really amped up usage. So without Chromebooks, we still could have had a very large usage population in Classroom, because it runs on any browser, it's got an Android and an iOS app. But the fact that Chromebooks were already in schools or starting to become popular, and that G Suite itself was already in schools and starting to become popular, just made Classroom a no-brainer for schools. And most importantly, for anybody in ed tech, you know that it's hard to sell to a school. It's hard to get an administrator to take on a product, turn it on, say it's okay, approve it, and even whether it's paid or not, but obviously if it's paid, it's even harder. G Suite was already in schools. We were already successful getting into schools. So Classroom was just a bit flip. It's just like turn it on and you're good. And so that also had a lot to do with it. But Chromebooks certainly helped. But I would say the two things helped each other. Having Classroom also helped Chromebook sell. So I think it was a combination.
Great. So let's talk more about expeditions. Can you talk about how that product came about, what the product is, and then more questions about how it can be used during these times?
Yeah. So expeditions. I'm trying to remember when, but probably the same exact time as Classroom. It was probably 2013. We literally did a hackathon. Might have been 2014 or 15, but we did a hackathon. Literally, two engineers had this idea. It was when VR basically started, and these engineers had an idea that they could make the Google Cardboard, and Edward just took one out, and it's so funny. So I'll do this live. Hang on a second. Just because I know I have these things everywhere. We had these Google Cardboard things that were given out at Google I/O, and it was just this thing that you could put a phone in it and turn it into a really useful virtual reality headset for really cheap, because it was just cardboard. So even if you bought it, it would be like $10 or $8, and you threw your phone in it, and it worked really well. These engineers had the idea that they could make it into something useful for schools where it could be a collaborative experience. And that was what our products were all about. So they literally tried to do this over a couple of weeks and came up with something that was so immediately compelling that we funded it. And that became Expeditions. And what it was a teacher could use their tablet, or their phone to take students that were using these cardboard viewers on a trip, and they could all be in the same place at the same time, and the teacher could drop them into a place, let them explore however they wanted. They could look around, but the teacher could actually see where they were looking, so she could, or he could, try to get their attention back to a certain replaced by tapping on a position in the image, in the 360 image. And there were so many features that just brought the class together. And I'll never forget this, the tests we were doing in the classroom were so immediately impactful. We could see that it was going to work, and so we just kept funding it. And it was, I would say it was one of the most successful, if not the most successful, VR app that we had at Google. And Best Buy and I think maybe one other group developed a whole business around selling better headsets and groups of phones and chargers to schools, and it was worth it. Schools, this was like the new. For those of you old enough to remember when they used to roll the TV into the class with a VHS player, this was the new VHS player. This was like, okay, let's roll this thing into a classroom, use it, and then roll it to the next classroom and use it. And I've done a lot of in-class expeditions, and they're amazing. They're just like really, it's a compelling experience. It's really, really good.
And let's talk a bit about how would you actually use that, perhaps even today as a parent, right? Clearly, some
Yeah,
people
I
may
mean,
talk about,
yeah, I'll tell you how I would use it today if I had younger kids and I planned a spring break vacation to Spain and I couldn't go, which, is probably the position that many of us are in. I should right now be on my way to Vail. Um, I would take them on an expedition to Spain. And it's so easy to do. You could literally get the expedition app on all the devices, get a few of these, which again you might not be able to get them now, but you don't really need the headset, because this thing is just to make it really feel immersive. But you can use what we call magic window mode, where you just hold your phone and you turn around and you can feel like you're somewhere else. It's almost like an augmented reality experience. And if you all have the app, one person can take the other people on a trip. So that's one way to do it. I mean, it's funny, I hadn't even thought of recommending that to other people that have been asking, hey, what can I do to keep my students really engaged, my kids really engaged that are now students? But it's a really great idea. Edward just threw in the chat, I think, the link to the app, and it's iOS and I think it's still iOS and Android. So very, very compelling. And you can probably use an older phone too. So if you have an older iPhone, if you've upgraded lately, you could probably even dedicate it to that.
Cool, thank you. So let's delve further into some of the questions that people are asking now, and then we can sort of filter it in as we get a understanding of who's in the audience to really cater this Q&A. So Sturgios, why don't you start with your question, since you were able to join earlier and put this in. So unmute yourself and ask your question live.
How distance learning tools impacting the learning process, and if there are any pitfalls that teachers or parents should be aware of.
The distance learning tools that I see people using today are much more the work tools that we use to meet remotely. I don't really see people yet, and I'd love to hear on the phone if anybody's got an experience with something that was intended to be a distance learning tool. But mostly what I'm seeing people use is Google Hangouts or Zoom with Google Classroom. That's kind of what I'm experiencing, and I definitely have a somewhat myopic view, because most of my friends are either in the district I'm in, which happens to be Chromebooks and Google, or my friends that are at Google, or we're at Google. But even the people that I know that are elsewhere in tech, that's generally what I'm seeing. And I think the main thing is whether or not, like the determinant of how they're teaching is whether or not it's synchronous or asynchronous. So the synchronous classes, like my son who's in high school is experiencing, he is literally going to class and they're doing it live. Every class is live, or the teacher is basically assigning like a video and they watch the video and they talk about it, or they do an assignment. And my daughter, who's in 8th grade, so middle school, is doing it asynchronous, and they're just giving assignments. And then every once in a while, a teacher will say, okay, we're going to meet up. We're going to do a Hangout or a Zoom. And they use both, actually. So, but some distance learning tools might have a lot more combination of features of classroom for assignment workflow as well as video. I mean, I've only seen being used in universities. and I don't know if it's being used elsewhere, but I mean, I think it's fantastic. I think it's, way more of a platform that is offered to schools to almost make it turnkey, right? So a school can immediately have a better remote experience and an online experience. I almost don't want to call it remote. And that was actually pretty good. Um, I think to get a lot of schools involved and engaged very quickly. I mean, I love that business model, and I don't know about how they're doing as a company, and I haven't used a 2U class in a long time. Yeah, it's a fantastic platform. I've heard nothing but good things about it.
But I wanted to ask how feasible it is to run a virtual classroom, especially sort of in this kind of pandemic type scenario. But other sort of scenarios would work as well. But how feasible it would be to do something like that? I mean, here in the UK, you have like something like 30 participants. Whether it's feasible to run a normal lesson as you would, but with children logging on like we are right now, or whether it's better to structure them in separate groups doing group work, or whether you would have to change the way that you would plan the lesson or structure the lesson based on how it's done. I mean, I'm getting a lot of pushback from the school that my daughter's in because they're absolutely refusing to do anything remotely other than
Wow.
just handing out sheets of paper.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think the problem that we've had generally in ed tech is that schools have been again, there's a curve. Some schools are not like this, but many schools have been reluctant to change. And so, with the pandemic like this, a lot of schools have seen this as an opportunity to try it. And some schools have refused, like your school has. Now, it is definitely feasible to do it online, and it's definitely feasible to do it for free. And some of I'll call it privacy concerns, because those are probably the most serious and significant, all the way to just attention concerns and other concerns about that remote tooling, like the ability to do it remotely, can be somewhat, I'll call it waived. In other words, I think schools should worry less about those things right now and worry way more about student engagement and learning, and let's keep the education going. And given those things, it's really easy to get something like this, like what we're doing now, set up and running. There'll be a few people that have a hard time with it, but very few students would have a hard time figuring it out. And it's very feasible to do both a very quick, full group interaction and then breakout groups like you suggested. Is that better? I think both are great. I think doing both, and it's very easy to do. I'll put a plug in for one feature that I've been constantly asking the Hangouts team to do at Google, and they know is one of the only features I think that Zoom has that they probably should have, which is this breakout rooms. If you've never tried it, it's just incredible. It's so useful. We do it a lot at Zapier, which is we have a big meeting like this, and then we say, you know what, this is too big for us to all participate. Let's break out into groups of 3, and then we'll bring you all back. You'll have 10 minutes, go. And the person running the meeting, so Chris in this case, could say, I want to break out into groups of 3. They see a screen that organizes it. They send people to their own rooms, and your screen would change to say, join breakout room. And then after 10 minutes, it gives you a countdown and says, okay, you're going to join the main room again. A teacher would, I think, at least a teacher who loves teaching would just be thrilled by that feature. Like that would just blow them away. But they need to see it, and they need to try it to see it. They need to be willing. But the same thing with Hangouts like this. It's very easy to say, okay, we're going to start separate meetings, put them on the calendar, have students try it. It's completely feasible.
Once you sort of have kids of your own, it's so hard to try and bring that over to the teachers who are so reticent, but yet the kids love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, some of the teachers are okay. I mean, it tends to be more the sort of the head of the school.
Yeah, the administrators have to be on. And just so you know, for people who are using either Hangouts and Zoom or whatever, the Hangouts team just launched, like almost just in time, the ability for the people, the teachers who run the class to completely turn off the unmute button for students. What was happening in Hangouts was students were having fun muting other people or unmuting, and that can be controlled now. So you can show your school how to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I would also add here, I see there was a comment in the chat as well. So I'm a part-time professor at the University of Texas, and on that side of the world, we've actually there was a debate about synchronous versus asynchronous classes, right? So real time, like this Hangout meeting versus pre-recorded lectures, and everyone was heavily in favor of synchronous. So real time collaboration, being able to ask Q&A, and also being able to adhere to a normal school day structure.
Yeah, it is, and I think for different ages it changes. It's interesting to me that in my community, the high school is synchronous and the middle school is asynchronous. I actually like a mix. I think a mix is fantastic. Like I really think that's a good way to go, because I've always been an advocate that different students thrive in different environments too. So giving students that choice is amazing if you can.
Jessica, thanks for the commentary on chat. Do you want to ask a question or make further comments? We'd love for you to contribute to this if you want to share your experience.
Hi there. So I am in Los Altos School District in Los Altos, California, in the Bay Area. And I just wanted to kind of say, just on the ground, I have, a fourth grader, a seventh grader, and an eighth grader. The eighth grader is in a private school, is doing synchronous classes with his teachers, but it's a small private school. They've been able to put it together pretty quickly. Our school district, which I am on the school board of, we have about 4,000 students, and it kind of ranges as to the ability of the student to participate in the remote learning, be it a Google Meet or whatnot, and the ability of the teachers. Like as it relates to our area, our school district actually started planning weeks ahead for this. But still, just like in any classroom, you have kids that are learning how to read or learning their different pieces, and some are better than others. Teachers, some are better than others in learning all of this. And per school, we have one tech person to help them. So that's 25 teachers that are students to that tech person. And then we've actually, because we are a public school district, we have parents, and we're in Los Altos, right next to Mountain View, where Google is. So we have a lot of Googlers as parents helping our teachers. But the point I wanted to make is, yes, that it is feasible, but it's not going to be perfect. Synchronous is going to be probably better for older students than younger students to some respect, just because of just like in the classroom management, but those teachers can't manage kids remotely. And barely can the parents right now, because we're all working from home also.
Exactly.
I just wanted to just give you a little more like on the ground perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess it wasn't really a question, but just I want you to be temperate about using the word feasibility, because I don't want parents to be like, he says it's feasible and it should happen that way. It's not. Everything is not going to be perfect.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a really good point. But see, my definition of feasible includes this broad range of perfection, and I think that's where teachers don't have a broad range, really, because they struggle so much with classroom management generally that this is like, forget it. You can't, and the fact is, you're right, you can't manage the class when it's remote. It's not possible. Yeah. But I will say that even my 8th grade daughter would say, hey, actually, I think teachers could manage the class better if they presented interesting information. And that's scary for my 8th grader to recognize that what's happening in a lot of classes is that they're not interested. And I do think this is an opportunity for teachers to just try it, like to actually go for it, like just see what it's like and see what you'd have to change. And the next day change it, and then the next day change it, and the next day change it. And it's a huge challenge. Like, I totally get it. So when I say feasible, literally, feasible doesn't mean achievable. It just means feasible.
Yeah.
Technically.
And that is exactly what our teachers are doing. They are literally iterating every other second, it seems. And just my daughter's teacher, because she's the 4th grader, will contact me daily. Like, how did that work? What do you see on your end?
That's awesome. And that's the thing here. Like on the ground, that's what I'm seeing too here. It's a challenge, but they're getting there. I mean, this is, that's the silver lining, is they're trying it, which is good.
Exactly.
And Jessica, what are you seeing work during this time and period? I know that everyone's now working from, but also studying at home and doing homeschooling. What is the Los Altos School District doing to, one, perhaps addressing the parents' needs, but also helping the students continue to learn during this period of time?
Well, really what we're more focusing on, especially as it relates to K through 6, because that's our elementary school, is we're really focusing on core subjects. Because some of our teachers are really losing it. Like, I'm up till 11 o'clock at night every night preparing new lessons because of the new modality they have to use. But we're like, listen, focus more on math and English, and social studies can mix in there too, but really math and English is what we're gonna really need them to do anyway. And then also another piece that we're finding, and I think you may even be finding this at your own homes, is that everybody's internet is coming to a standstill because mommy, daddy, and 3 kids are using it. We have business level internet, and we're at a snail's pace at around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. So that is a problem, using all these services. So I think having a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous is key, because the synchronous actually will put the internet at a standstill and they won't be learning at all.
Optional synchronous is really smart.
Yes.
And is the school district using Google Classroom? Do they use Edmodo?
We're Google Classroom, and we added the Google Meet functionality. So we have not bought into Zoom, but the Google Meet I found is useful, and I've started using it basically last week, but I had been using Zoom. I think Zoom is still a little better, and like you said, being able to do the breakout classrooms is a good feature. So if Google could get that together quick, that'd be nice. But some people may start moving over to Zoom, but we're using what we can afford. Right? We're in an affluent district, but we still don't have enough money to do everything. So we're just really trying to do our best.
Other tools like Edmodo or other platforms at all, or just focus on Google Classroom?
Yeah, so Google Classroom, we use the whole Google suite, but then they're using Khan, Quill, trying to figure out all the different things. There's a lot of different areas where they're getting all the subject matter to use.
Yeah, I will mention there's one or two apps that I do hear from students even that say that's their favorite app, which is Quizlet and Pear Deck. Just incredible, really useful and engaging.
Yeah, I think Kahoot is another one popular with the kids.
Yeah,
flashcard kind of quizzes.
Yeah, definitely.
Sadiq, I know Sadiq, you had questions before that you wanted to ask. Would you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
So I actually have an interesting experience myself right now with 3 kids. Our oldest is in the 4th grade, and the youngest is in kindergarten, and the one in the middle is in 2nd grade, and they're doing, I wouldn't even call it asynchronous as much. It's just, they're being assigned things to do through things like iExcel, Khan Academy, etc. And every once in a while they have a live session. And from my perspective, one part of it is, of course, the communication with the teacher, and ideally having those sessions where you can interact with your class as well as your teacher. But also the other thing that's been somewhat challenging is just trying to get a really good sense of what the curriculum is across all of these applications and managing that, across 3 kids on a daily basis, which I think, regardless of the communication medium, is difficult to do and to keep up with, right? So I'm not sure if so we don't have something like Google Classes, for example. It's just a variety of different things, a hodgepodge of different things that are in the mix. And I'm not experiencing that just in this scenario, to be honest. So until very recently, I just moved to the Bay Area. Until very recently, my kids were going to international schools in Bangalore, and they're even outside of the context of what's happening now. They were constantly immersed in different apps and different technologies, but we had the same issue there. It wasn't so much in that scenario getting enough face time with the teacher or the fidelity of the communication. It was more how do you manage all of this in a sane enough manner? And obviously now that becomes completely compounded and even more difficult. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, just in terms of sort of curriculum management outside of even the remote sessions and the
So
likes.
this is a perfect parallel to me to remote work, which is one of the things I have found in using a tool like Google Classroom or 2U or anything that's going to push schools to put in writing, per se, in digital writing, what the curriculum is, what's the assignment, what's next, what's the expectation of the student, even when you could be in school. It's incredibly helpful for students to understand what's next. Like, what am I going to be learning? What's the learning objective, and what's the assignment, and therefore, and then what's next? So that students that can move ahead can, and students that have a hard time organizing these things in their head, that have a hard time taking good notes, that have something that's really helpful for them to organize the work. When we go remote, the lack of that organization and that intentional communication is a disaster, like you're experiencing. It's like really like haphazard, and it shouldn't be falling to the parents. And that, I have to admit, like for me, the most important, impactful thing that we did with Classroom was just give schools a place to put it all down. And to say next year, like even if they liked what they assigned, they could basically say, great, let's rerun that class. Like, let's actually go with the assignment we did in the first week the prior year, or let's change it, and hopefully they do change it. But I think it doesn't hurt to try to provide them with that organization. Like, even if you said, okay, I'm not going to run the school, but for my own students, let's get down, like, okay, Monday, what are you going to be doing? Tuesday, what are you going to be doing? And you might even want to do it in Google Classroom, because you can do it with your Gmail account. But the reason I say it's a great parallel to remote work is I've been working remotely now for 6 months, and I feel really lucky, because now people are like, whoa, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, I went through that in September. I figured that out. And one of the things that it definitely presents is the same challenge, which is you have to be way more intentional in writing. You have to be both synchronous and asynchronous, and everybody has to have really clear objectives. And if you don't have clear objectives, then everything else falls apart. And I think it's the same with school. And so I would say just try to provide your own students, your own kids, with some of that like feeling of achievement by saying, here's what we expect to get done this week. Let's see if we can get it done. And if they do, and they get it done by Wednesday, great, go play for 2 days, or give them more to learn. But I think schools have the responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I think the parallel to remote work wasn't. I actually asked a question in the submission about how do you think the future of education and the future of work sort of relate? I mean, I think remote work is one aspect of the future of work. I don't think it's by any means even the major aspect. I think it's maybe a big part of it. But I think it's a very, very interesting observation, because I've been working remote for almost 7 of the last 10 years. So I've been remote pretty much all through. But I think the sort of the big difference between remote work and working in an office setting is in remote work, if your processes and your ability to sort of manage tasks and at a micro level and then at a macro level don't all sync up, when you go remote, it's like putting a magnifying lens on things that you could cover up in an office setting. You can't really cover up in a remote setting. It sort of blows up even more.
Yeah.
But I experienced the same thing with the kids' school, but I for some reason hadn't made that connect. But you're right, like that's exactly what it is, right? Like the ability to see the bigger picture and then play it out in a way that sort of makes sense. So yeah, I think that's a good tip. Particularly the idea of trying to organize your week early and then trying to in many ways the way you would with remote work, that would pretty much be exactly that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say really good teachers do that, and at work, really good managers do that.
Right.
Cool. And Jonathan, maybe you can share a specific example. You did mention that since you've been fully remote now for the past 6 months, you're more clearer, perhaps, and attentive in writing. Like, do you structure your emails differently? Is it just timing goes out? What actually has differed in terms of your approach now?
I think we are more explicit about objectives, short term and long term. But long term, I've seen done well anyway in other settings, not just remote. But in remote setting, I feel like we're better about short term objectives, and we are actually doing a lot more asynchronously. In other words, we depend on the writing. We ask people to explicitly talk about what they learned every week, what their number one priority is for the coming week, how they did on their number one priority the prior week, and within teams, both one-on-one and team settings, the synchronous get-togethers are sacred. They're not optional. Like the one-on-ones that I experienced at Google felt very optional, because you're either sitting right next to the person or you're with them enough where it just felt like, yeah, we'll use that time if we need it, but it's not that useful. We didn't, and that varied, definitely. But too often it felt like it became something that wasn't that useful. And same with team meetings. Team meetings felt like status updates, and now they have way more. We put way more structure around them so that we get the most out of that time and we never miss it. Like I rarely miss one-on-ones now, and I do a lot of them, but they're useful. They're something that really gives us a chance to check in.
So a question from Dennis, who can't unmute himself as his little one's sleeping next to him, so I'll ask it on his behalf. Question to both Jessica and Jonathan: do you see certain subjects that are better taught synchronously versus asynchronous, better in a sense of quality, but also ease of content absorption?
So this is where my initial reaction, and again, I haven't thought too much about this. My initial reaction is, I think it's just like it would in school, depends so much on the teacher. If the teacher is a compelling storyteller, then let them talk, let them be synchronous and keep the students' attention. If they've put together a lesson that's really powerful, then synchronous is great. If the teacher is, frankly, I'm speaking extremely frankly here, if the teacher is boring, then they shouldn't have been teaching in school or outside of school. And asynchronous is probably better. Let somebody else tell the student a story. Let somebody else provide compelling and engaging material. I do think too many teachers feel like the role is to stand in front of the class and talk. And I can say from experience, my kids love the teachers that engage them and don't just stand up and talk and actually think that that's the wrong way to teach. So in a synchronous class, I'd love it if they are getting the kids to interact with each other, giving a little bit of a prompt and getting them to interact, or if they are a great storyteller, to tell it. But I don't think that's subject dependent in most cases. However, there are exceptions, which is, let's do some asynchronous math to see where you're understanding it or not, and then get together, right? Give the teacher more of an office hours approach to say, I will work with you when you need help. And then students can get together in smaller groups. Or reading, obviously, do that asynchronously and then talk about it, then get together as a group and talk about it. But I don't think it differs that much than what I would have said for in-class work. I think in-class work has similar rules.
Cool. Thank you, Jonathan. And then Jessica, I know you answered over text, but did you want to add anything else as well?
Bear with me for a second. Yes. I just wanted to, reiterate it. I think it really depends on the age group for synchronous and asynchronous. Also, I think you need to be careful about what you're saying about these teachers. Honestly, they wouldn't be doing this job if they didn't have a passion for this job, and they get paid very little to do what they do. I feel what you're saying is on the verge of teacher bashing. They're trying their hardest to make it, to show their passion. But the kids, when you have groups of 20 to 30 kids, you're not going to be able to get every last person to pay attention. You can't do that with adults either. So please be careful on this, what you're saying. Either way, my standpoint really comes from, it's more of the age groups. I think the older kids can deal with synchronous better because they can manage themselves better. But the 5 through, I would say, 9, 10-year-olds may need kind of a combo, or it should be smaller groups.
Thank you.
That's fair. And I definitely do not intend to teacher bash. It's more about, I actually think this is just bringing out the kind of the most important aspect of when certain teaching styles work or not. I have more sensitivity to that as you do. So I totally appreciate you mentioning that, but it's not how I feel.
So why don't we go over to Europe? I know we have Daniel dialing in from Germany. We have Himan dialing from Norway. We have David dialing in from Barcelona, I believe. So what questions do you have from over Europe on that side of the world?
Thanks for the shout out. It's pretty late here in Norway. Hi, everybody. So Jonathan, my question is more towards looking out 5-10 years down the line. Where do you think education is heading, and do you think or see a significant difference across continents? We're not talking about first world, second world, third world anymore, because one thing COVID has shown us is that most country leaders are utterly unprepared. So let's talk more about cultural and continental differences, and where do you think things are going to head?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. Good point. I do think what we're experiencing here is almost a forced evolution into a world that will probably become a little bit more part of how teaching is done. And this is where I'm really, I have to say, seeing a bit of a silver lining to at least say, hey, at least we gave it a try. Let's now understand where it was weak, where it did work, where it didn't work, what skills we have to help teachers, obtain to make it work. Where I think it's really where we're also weak in infrastructure, to Jessica's point about bandwidth. And we, my main concern for some of the schools is that there's not every student is going to have connectivity. So that's why I like optional on the synchronous stuff. I think it's feasible for most people to be able to receive things via email or some other way, but not achievable for every student to equally get access to bandwidth. So I think equality is something we have to really consider in a big way. And that's a global issue. But for me, I think where education is heading is a combination of these tools with, hopefully still a ton of in-person education, particularly so students can interact with each other and gain some of the social skills and get the mentorship of teachers. So that's partially what I think.
Thank you. Back to the point that you made about hopefully kids can learn some social skills as well, and that's what definitely in sunny Singapore where we met Christopher. But I see that they use technology in a very different way compared to what we used to use, or what kind of has disrupted in last 3 weeks. They are not speaking to each other as much as they used to. And they are getting buried under the amount of homework. So laptop or an iPad, which used to be a fun activity for kids, for the last 3 weeks has become a burden. So how do you navigate those challenges, and what is your advice for parents, to make sure the relationship that kids have with technology is a positive one and not a negative one?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I'm not against the phone in my kids' hands becoming more of the feeling of a call it a work device. In other words, a device that they use during school, and then after school being able to get together, but in the mode where we can't get together that we're in now, then I could see why that's kind of changing for the negative, which is they lose the social connection. But I'm not really sure I have a good answer. I think it's something where you have to try to manage, and this goes to maybe a little bit to process, and maybe some of you have some experience that you can share too. But I think it's really useful to set boundaries. This is again work and school, to be able to say school starts here and ends here. And I think what kids are doing probably is socializing during that school time, when really they should try to focus on the school part of it and then socialize after, which was more normal. And then I think what's happening, maybe that you're seeing, is they're socializing a lot during the school day because they're all online, and they never used to be able to be online. So they only spoke with the students that were next to them in class. And now they're speaking all day. And so when the night comes and they're, quote, out of school, now they're catching up on schoolwork, or they're just sick of having the device in their hand. So I'm not really sure, though. That's a tough one. I've got
Okay, but thanks a lot for a very candid answer, and yeah, we should all think about it. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Christopher.
Sure. Thanks so much. Priscilla, do you want to ask your question verbally?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, Jonathan, and all the other parents on the call. I'm co-founder of mathpapa.com. It's an online automated math tutor. So my question is, now that everyone's at home, what are you seeing are the changes in behavior with the parents engaging with their students' homework? Is that something that could be, you're seeing people using different tools for facilitating that, and also like communicating with the teachers? Because I know like that's always been kind of a interesting loop.
Yeah, I have to admit, I think we're in a mode. Well, two things. First, I don't have students in the age anymore where they need help with homework, which is both a blessing and a curse for me. I miss it, and but of course, right now it's nice not to have that burden, and I like the fact that they're more independent. But I think the other point is we're in a very biased experiment right now. So I think parents just right now are in a completely different mode than normal with their students at home and them at home working. So I don't know. I don't know if we can even go by what's happening today. And so I don't have much experience with it. Other people might actually want to chime in to say what are they seeing, but I haven't had the homework helper hat on for a while. So the only thing I do know is that a lot of parents have called me to say, how can I get access to my students' Google Classroom? How can I get involved and understand what's being assigned to them? So I've helped parents with that. That's it.
Okay, thanks. And if any other parents like have any insights to share, I know like this would be also helpful for Chris.
Well, I was going to say what we're trying to do. I mean, we're day 3 of homeschooling. Day 1 and 2 went really well. They got up, they did as they told. We even had register with some of the class via Zoom. And for my son, it involved some of his stuffed toys because not the other kids hadn't joined, so we did register with the stuffed toys and with the kids, and that was fun. And day 2 was okay. Day 3 today has been a complete mess. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is get the other kids joining and do group home learning. So this is where we basically speaking to the other parents and saying, what have they done? What haven't they done? What do you think they could do together at what time? Maybe we'll get them both on Google Hangout, just talking while they're doing their homework or doing their home learning, and just see if they want to do it in groups of 2 or 3, just to change the men, to get the novelty of mum being there asking the questions, and get that novelty's over. So now it's over to getting the other kids involved and seeing if they want to do group work together.
We're about to run out of time, Jonathan. Maybe 2 questions finally. One is, any other final piece of advice for parents who are on this that you want to share during this time?
No, I mean, I think we all are feeling what's going on. And one thing I will say that you've all probably felt, you don't need me to tell you this, is everybody, including our kids, need a little bit more leeway. And to Jessica's point about the teachers, they're struggling. This is a 180-degree shift for them. It's hard enough to go to school and teach, but to not have the school there and still be asked to teach is super hard also. And they're working from home. And so they've got their own environment. So everybody needs a little bit of space and extra empathy to get this done and do it effectively. I think that's the most important thing. And the second thing I would say is just try some of these technologies. Like if you're not sure what Google Classroom is and you want to see what it's like, go try it. And if you want to see what your students experiencing, sit with them and watch them during the day, as much as they probably hate that. I know my students hate it.
The final question is, can you expand a little bit about Zapier, perhaps how Zapier can be helpful to any parents or any individuals who are in this call?
Yeah, it's a great point. So Zapier, actually, I've been thinking about what we could do for students with Zapier. And so Zapier basically lets you connect apps for different workflows. So one of the things you can do with Zapier is set time-based events. So you could even actually set up, I'll call it the school babysitter for your student, to text them every hour to say, okay, this is time to move over to math, time to move over to English, time to get some exercise, stand up and move for 15 minutes. So those are some of the things you could do with it that are school related, maybe basic, but it's generally meant to be an automation creator. The ability to create automation across 2,000 apps. So people use it a ton for Google Sheets and Calendar and Gmail and all the Google apps, but also for Slack and Zoom and pretty much any app you use. So that's what Zapier is about. And there's a pretty generous free tier, so you could do what I was just describing easily for free.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for joining today. Really appreciate all the questions and lively discussion. Feel free to let me know if you want other speakers that are going to be interesting and helpful for you, but also with this online community, parents.mobilize.io. If you're not invited yet, feel free to let me know. You can continue conversations there. And Jonathan, thank you again for all your time and advice.
Great to see everybody. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.